I'm very happy and pleased to introduce the speakers. To my right is Samantha Windsor, and she's been with the Office of Inspector General for 9.5 years. Samantha served as a surveyor in the Louisville Northern Enforcement Branch in the Louisville area, and that is currently she holds the position of Assistant Division Director, and she's over Enforcement and Training and Quality Assurance Branch. Then we have Jerry Mayo, who's to the right of Samantha. He's with the Louisville and Louisville area, the Northern Enforcement Branch as well, in the Office of Inspector General. He has served in 13 years in that capacity. He is currently a supervisor, and he has 30 years of experience in state government. But as with his experience with the OIG's office, he was a surveyor and complaints coordinator, and his specialty was personal care. So those are our speakers for the day, so they will be entertaining you all day. So without further ado, they will come up and start the presentation.
This is not a bomb. I know. It looks strange. I'm going to have, this is like doing weights with this thing. I am Samantha Windsor. This is Jerry Mayo. And we're going to do this training a little bit different than we normally have. Usually you have one person standing up there talking to you the whole day. That's not going to happen. Jerry and I are going to be speaking to you, giving you examples, role plays. We're going to be feeding off of one another. We really want you to be involved and ask questions, because this is about a learning process for you, helping you to understand the regulations and going forth and prospering. So we really want that interaction. I don't want you to feel afraid to ask a question. There are no stupid questions, none whatsoever. If you are someone who does not like asking questions and you don't want your voice on video, I don't want mine either. I asked him if he had the skinny thing up there, the filter to make me look smaller and more sleek or something, and he said he did. So you better, Steve. Anyway, feel free to put it down on a piece of paper if you'd like and submit it into Terry Cook. She's in the back, or Michelle Mitchell, who just spoke with you. We'll be happy to bring that up throughout the course of the day. And we will be starting with discussing regulations. We're going to have every reg that we're discussing is on this PowerPoint, okay? And we're not going to read every slide to you. That's not what this is about. You have a reg manual that has all the regs that you need to know, everything you were afraid to ask about. It's all before you. The reason why you only have one reg manual is because we are the state and we have limited funds, and it's one per entity. Yeah, well, I was trying to be, Anyway, but we are in the process, our office is in the process of getting those reg manuals that you have before you up online for people to be able to download and print everything off that's in those manuals. So you will have access to that hopefully in the near future. But like I said, we do want your participation. We want you involved. Jerry is primarily the lead, and I'll be feeding in. I will be taking the lead later in the afternoon. So I'm going to let him take over, and you'll probably, I don't know if I'll be carrying the bomb microphone or not. It really isn't. You're going to stay? Okay. So I'm going to let Jerry take over, and you'll be hearing from both of us throughout the day.
Well, good morning. First of all, can everybody hear me? Does this mic work? Am I speaking loud enough? You okay? All right. I guess the guy with the camera says okay, so that must be all right. I'm not very good with technology, so you're going to have to kind of, where I started. Okay, there we go. All right. I don't care much for PowerPoints because I feel like most people can read, and we can just give you the PowerPoint presentation. You can take it back to your facilities and read it and be done. But I think it is helpful to have something to refer to later. So I'm going to go with the PowerPoint, okay? But I'm not going to carry this bomb thing around. That drives me crazy. Basically, what we're going to do is we're talking about the objectives of the training here. We want to make sure that everybody knows how the regulations work, what the expectations are. Because if you don't have the rules up front, you don't understand the guidelines, etc., then how are you supposed to be able to make sure that they're implemented appropriately? And then you get a survey team that comes in and says, we've got issues here, we have problems, we have deficiencies. So what we're hoping today is to be able to take any questions you may have, any things that may be a little fuzzy to you, and give you some clarification to that. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is personal care home and exactly what a personal care home is. It actually is a entity, a building. It has beds, it has residents, it has services, it has staff. There's lots of things that go on in a personal care home. So basically, what we've got is in this regulation, it talks about a resident has to be 16 years age or older. They have to be ambulatory or mobile ambulatory. Those are things that are pretty important. We're going to talk about the definition of those in a minute. That individual also has to be able to manage most of their activities of daily living. And then anyone who's non-ambulatory, non-mobile, cannot be, and that's very definite here in this regulation, cannot be or is not eligible for residence in a personal care home. Now that's kind of important. Does anybody have any questions? Is that fairly clear to everybody with that? That if you're not 16 years old and you're not ambulatory, you're not mobile ambulatory, you can't manage most of your activities of daily living, you cannot be in a personal care home. Now we're going to talk about activities of daily living because I think that is very ambiguous to a lot of people. Well, we're very lucky in personal care home because you don't see this in almost any type of regulation. There'll be definitions in a regulation, but with personal care home, not only have they given you a definition, but then they've given you examples of those definitions. And I correct me if I'm wrong, Samantha, but I don't think there's a set of regulations out there that gives you an example. They'll give you a definition, but they don't give you examples. So the personal care home, when these regulations were implemented, they actually went to the extra step of giving us examples. So they defined activities of daily living as having certain categories, and they are self-help, communication, and socialization. Well, with self-help, the examples are ability to feed oneself, bathe oneself, dress oneself. With communication, it's the ability to place phone calls, write letters, and understand instructions. And then socializations, it's shop, to be considerate of others, work with others, and participate in activities. Now, I don't want anyone to walk away from this training and say, well, you know, Mr. Smith, who was admitted last week, he hates to shop, so he won't shop, so he can't be in a personal care home. We have to be reasonable with this. So what we look at is we look at most of the activities of daily living. We don't have a definition for most. So when we don't have a definition for something, we go to the dictionary. So the dictionary gives us an example or gives us the definition of what the word most means. So when we look at that, which also is fairly reasonable, most people understand what most means. So you have an individual who, for example, may have arthritis and has difficulty getting dressed. But they know they need to be dressed. They understand that a reasonable individual walks around with clothing on. And they can request assistance or they can accept assistance. That would be a person who was eligible for personal care. Now, on the other hand, we have Miss Samantha. And I come into Miss Samantha's room, knock on her door. Miss Samantha, are you ready to have breakfast this morning? Miss Samantha, let's get up and get dressed. Let's put your sweater on. And she just stares at me and doesn't do anything. So I have to get her sweater, I have to get her dressed, I have to put her shoes on, her pants on, and everything. Is she eligible for personal care? If we're looking at self-help. That's a question that you have to ask yourself. If she cannot even assist in getting dressed, then does she belong in personal care? And that would go on to mean bathing. Miss Samantha has arthritis. She's had this for a long time. She has difficulty holding a washcloth. She has difficulty putting soap on the washcloth. But she understands that she needs to take a bath. She understands hygiene. She may even call and ask for assistance. But if it's offered to her, she accepts that assistance. She takes care of that. She knows she needs to take care of that, even though she may not be able to wash the middle of her back, or may not be able to get her hands in her hair to wash her hair. She's accepting that assistance. She understands she needs that assistance. But if she sits there and looks at me and doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about, doesn't understand what hygiene is, then she really doesn't belong in a personal care home. Are we all on the same page with that? Kind of understand that? Okay. And then, of course, that's what I'm giving you are very black and white examples, and very seldom does somebody fall on this end of the spectrum or this end. It's usually in between, because we're dealing with the population, well, we all are, to a degree, declining every day. So that's where it's important that as a facility, that you're doing assessments, that you're making sure that you know where that individual is in this process. Because there will come a time where, and it's going to be a gray area for a while there, where they'll hit a line when you recognize this individual no longer is appropriate for personal care. So, and the expectation from the Office of the Inspector General with these regulations is that the facility is aware of when that is, and that you're taking appropriate actions for that. Communication, ability to place phone calls. Once I get home from work, because I'm the complaints coordinator in the Louisville office in the Northern Enforcement Branch, I'm on the phone all day long. Once I get home, you can't call me. I don't answer the phone. I don't talk on the phone. So, if I end up in your personal care home, I'm not going to be placing phone calls. The chances are I'm going to run when I hear a phone ring. So that doesn't mean I'm not going to be eligible for a personal care home. Once again, let's be reasonable. He doesn't want to talk on the phone, but can he talk on the phone? Can he write letters? Does he understand instructions? And I think the really important part of this is, does he understand instructions? You know, to say, Jerry, the meal, we're getting ready to eat lunch, and I don't understand what you're talking about. Or, Jerry, you can't step out in front of a car. You know, you need to come back in, you need to do this. If I don't understand those basic instructions, or there's an alarm going off because there's a fire, and I just stand there, and Samantha comes up to me as the staff, and she says, we need to get out of the building, and I just sort of stand there. There's some issues with understanding instructions. So, once again, we need to be reasonable. And when I'm admitted, I may understand those. But after a year goes by, I may not understand that anymore. So once again, the expectation is this facility is monitoring me, monitoring my declines, monitoring progress, etc., to make sure that I am eligible and appropriate for placement in a personal care home. With that, we'll talk a little bit about, well, let's go on and talk about socialization. Basically, ability to shop. I don't like to shop. Considerate of others. That is important. They don't have to have an award-winning personality and be the greeter at the front door, but they have to be considerate enough not to make other people's lives miserable in your facility. Now, this kind of gets a little tricky here. They can be grumpy, and they can be unhappy, and they can be a little bit nasty. But if they're going around punching, hitting, kicking, being violent to people, that's another story. Because now you have other residents involved. And forgive me when I say this, I'm not going to talk a lot about what happens with staff in your facility, because really and truly the regulations don't govern what residents do to your staff. This is going to be more focused on residents and what happens with residents. I recognize all of you have a very difficult job, your staff has a very difficult job, but it's not something I really can be involved with per se. Okay? So we're going to talk about, mainly the focus is going to be on residents. So you have someone who may be able to feed themselves, bathe themselves, place phone calls, write letters, understand instructions, but they're doing violent things, they're committing violent acts, they're being sexually assaultive or sexually inappropriate. They may even understand exactly what they're doing. My father told me once, as a young man, I got my feelings hurt by a lady who lived up the street. I cut her grass. I came home, and my belief system was that she was old. Therefore, she should be sweet and nice. My father explained to me that mean young people, unless somebody shoots them, become lots of times mean old people. So, just because somebody's in your facility and they need assistance, regardless of their age, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be an award-winning personality. So you have to deal with that individual. But when that individual cannot be considerate of others, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not talking about holding a door open or pulling a chair out for someone, but actually being considerate of others to the point where it starts infringing on that person's rights or endangering other people, they may not be appropriate for your personal care home. So that's kind of a gray area also, because it also is not an invitation for the facility to say, well, we're just going to transfer everybody out that's difficult. That's not, we need to find ways to be able to deal with that individual in the personal care home. But if it gets down to the point where there is not, and all attempts have failed, then you need to be looking at, is that person appropriate for your personal care home? Then moving on to working with others, participating in activities. And it doesn't have to be the activities that necessarily you have on your schedule. So you may have bingo. I need to tell you, I would die. If bingo was the only activity I had, I'd just as soon be shot in the head.
Same here.
So make sure your activities, and we'll talk about that, make sure your activities are well-rounded. But let's say that you've done a great job with your activities. And in that process, you just have somebody who doesn't like them, who is not a social animal, does not care for activities. That doesn't necessarily mean they're inappropriate for personal care. If it's their choice not to participate. But if they have no clue what you're talking about, don't understand, then that's what we're looking at. Is we're trying to be reasonable. Is this individual appropriate for personal care? Could they participate in activities, but they choose not to? Now, I've had providers tell me, and I'm sure it would be none of you, have told me, well, she chooses not to participate in activities. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know. She would have sat in her room and burned up if there had been a fire. That's not choosing not to participate in activities. That's not even understanding what an activity is. So I'm sure nobody here would do that. But that's just something to think about when we're looking at personal care. And then we move on to activity services. And this is where we were talking about social and recreational opportunities to stimulate physical and mental abilities, encourage, develop a sense of usefulness and self-respect. So we want to encourage the residents of a personal care home to participate in activities. And that's going to mean that you're going to need to, for example, your assessment of this resident, your initial assessment when they're coming in, finding out what they're interested in. And I mean, this isn't a big deal. This is things that your staff's going to be talking to this individual all the time. So actually, your frontline staff, the people that are working with the residents every day, are probably going to be able to give you quite a bit of information you may not have gotten on the front end when they've actually admitted to your facility. I find that lots of times I'll be talking to administrative staff and they'll tell me about the resident. But then I'll go talk to, for example, an aide on the floor who tells me about a resident that doesn't sound anything at all like what I've just heard from administrative staff. Because this individual works with this person every single day. They learn things, maybe they've gained the individual's trust, they now feel comfortable after being there a while, and they start talking, they start opening up. And I mean, who hasn't seen that? Somebody that's very quiet, very shy when they first come in, and within 3 months, they're running the place. They're outgoing, So it's very important that you learn about residents, and then as residents change, as, for example, a decline or something that may have been very enjoyable to them at one time, now with the death of a loved one, that may be very painful for them. Or simply that later in life, we have residents that have told me, well, I painted when I was younger, but once I got married, had children, and there was just no time for that sort of thing. We had no money, etc. Now they're at a stage in life where maybe it's something they might like to pick up. They might like to revisit that and see what that's like. And these are great opportunities for people. And I always try to put myself in that place. What would I like to do? What are the things that I enjoy doing now? There's so many things that individuals that go into healthcare facilities have to give up. And so I think it's an opportunity to search for things that we can replace things they've lost. And some facilities do a great job, some do an okay job, and then I've seen some that don't do such a good job. So I think that's a really good opportunity, and it's easy for me to stand up here and tell you, go out and spend $10,000 on this, when, in this economy, nobody has that kind of money to do.
But there's lots of things that are actually very simple and don't cost a lot that people do enjoy. You can look at your own self and think of things that are enjoyable to you. I've had residents tell me during interviews that they like watching a particular show and they enjoy talking to the staff about it the next day. To tell them about the show, they discuss it, whether it be a soap opera or whatever else. That actually is kind of an activity. It's a fun thing. I know that years ago, I'm dating myself here, when, what was this show? Dallas was on. I can remember the next Monday or whatever day it was that we were at work. I mean, that's everybody talked about it that morning. That's actually an activity. Of course, we're state employees. We shouldn't be doing that. But that was an activity. And that's the same thing, things like that. And I mean, that doesn't really cost anything. That's just some involvement with the residents. It's something that's fun that they would enjoy. So anyway, I'm kind of getting off on that. But activities is a really important thing for me because I have been to facilities that it's just broken my heart to see somebody just sitting there, and then you get to talking to them and find out they will tell you the things they missed. Like, these are things that could be done here. This person could be involved in these things. Not too awful long ago, I don't survey much anymore, but I was at a facility where there's a gentleman in his room. Knocked on his door, asked him if I could ask him some questions, had some things we were doing on investigation. I got those out of the way. And then just at the end, I asked him, he says, is there anything that you would like to do differently? He's like, no, everything's fine. They're great. They're wonderful. Get great care. Food's good. So I thought, well, all right. So I said, well, there's an activity going down the hall. Were you aware of that? He said, yeah, I know what they do here. And I said, do you ever get involved? He said, no. They don't do the things I like to do. So a little bit more questioning, and what I found out was that this gentleman liked what I've always referred to as kind of highbrow arts. He loved opera. He loved classical music. Well, the facility, when I looked at their activities calendar, they had a church coming in to do hymns. They had a country music sing-along with a kind of a barbecue cookout. They had bingo. So when I talked to this gentleman, all of these things were foreign to him. They were things he'd never done before. They weren't things he enjoyed, but there was nothing for him to do. Well, at the same time, I also understand that the facility, saying, we're going to have opera night, is probably going to have one gentleman there, and that's it. So that's really not feasible necessarily for the facility to put on a big production, but it wouldn't have been a big deal because he had no music there to find out about what were his favorite operas, what was maybe some music or a CD that could be picked up. And I'll tell you that opera CDs are in the dollar bin at the music store, so it's not really going to be an expensive deal. So there were things that could be done. And I've run into residents that, I've recognized maybe a painting they have in their room, and then they want to talk about it. They want to talk about when they got it, how they got it, or they might enjoy art. And not that I'm a big aficionado, but it's something that maybe people can look into, get a little information on, or even let the residents maybe do some kind of little talk about something that they found very interesting. I've seen seamstresses actually teach a class. They brought in a couple of sewing machines. So there's lots of things that I think a facility can do to expand on their activities, and it really would be nice. I know it involves time, I know it involves staff, but this truly are people's lives, and I think it's very important to do that. So I've done my little sermon on activities there. And continuing on with definitions, we talk about who an administrator is and what their qualifications are. And some of these I'm going to kind of move past because I don't know that we really need to address. I think everybody can read this and understand who an administrator is. We talk about ambulatory, non-ambulatory, and I think these are pretty important. Ambulatory is pretty cut and dry. You can walk without assistance. You can get across the room, you can get back across the room, you don't need assistance. Now, it doesn't talk about how far, but let's be reasonable. If somebody can walk 2 feet without assistance, are they really ambulatory? No. The premise here is to be reasonable. Can you pretty much walk? Now, does it say you have to be able to walk, like a 21-year-old with no problems at all? No. But if you can walk and you can get from point A to point B, you can self-exit that building, you are ambulatory. Okay. Mobile, non-ambulatory. Basically, unable to walk without assistance, but able to move from place to place, self-exit the building, use any sort of device like a walker, crutches, wheelchair, and you're capable of independent bed to chair transfer with minimal assistance. So you can have some assistance there, okay? But basically, you can get about. Now, this is the person in the wheelchair that, she's coming through, everybody step back. She's getting through with the walker. And it is amazing that I've watched people that were very scared of walking, and you give them one of these little walkers with the wheels, and they're all over the place. Mobile, non-ambulatory. And I think those are pretty self-explanatory. But I really want to kind of define these because there has been some issues that have come up over the state lately about what is mobile, non-ambulatory, and what is ambulatory. Okay. Non-ambulatory is unable to walk without assistance. Okay. You have to have assistance of some type, so you are non-ambulatory. Non-mobile is you are plain and simple, unable to move from place to place. Now, there are some issues. If somebody refuses to move, and they can, there's not a doubt in anybody's mind. They're in that wheelchair and they can move. You cannot tell me, well, if there was a fire, they'd move. You don't know that. If they're refusing to move, even though there's really no reason for them not to, you have to then start looking into, are they appropriate for personal care? Because somebody can do something but they refuse to do it, I could be considerate of others, but I'm not going to be. Instead, I'm going to be violent, I'm going to flip tables over, I'm going to slap people, I'm going to sexually assault them, I'm going to do all these other things. I don't have to do that. So then you have to say, is that person appropriate? Just because they could be if they choose not to be. Okay? I don't want to confuse that with somebody who says, I know I'm supposed to be on the special diet, I choose not to. They still have a right. And just like that, they have the right. Everybody in this country has rights. So you have the right to go out and rob. You have the right to go out and rob a convenience store, all right? But there's consequences to those actions also. Personal care home residents also have consequences to their actions. They're not in jail. They're not, unless they're adjudicated incompetent, they're not necessarily incompetent. So that's another thing too. If somebody is violent in your facility, you have to look at, I get lots of times responses from providers saying, well, we didn't know what to do. What do you mean you didn't know what to do? The person is alert and oriented, they're not adjudicated incompetent, and they're assaulting your staff. Call the police. Okay? You're not there to be beat up on. Now, at the same time, just because somebody says, get out of my room, I don't want to talk to you, don't call the police. I mean, they also have the right to be grumpy, they have the right to refuse services. If you don't want, at the hotel you're staying in, if you don't want the maid coming in making up the bed, you don't have to punch her. You can just put a do not disturb or say, go away, come back another time. Well, so can they. Well, that's communication, which we talked about. So that's being considerate of others. License, and this is pretty much, some of these, like I said, I'm just going to flip through because I don't know that they're really pertinent to what we're doing. I think all the regulations are important, but some of these are just going to kind of slip through. Personal care, and this pretty much is what a personal care home is. And this should be something that the resident and their family members or the responsible party are notified of upon admission to the facility. They should be very aware of what services are being provided. And we're talking to, and we're not limited to these things because it does have that little disclaimer. To achieve and maintain good personal hygiene, including but not limited to assistance with bathing, shaving, cleaning, trimming of fingernails, toenails, cleaning of mouth and teeth, washing, grooming, cutting of hair. So we'll talk about this real quickly here. When you take a bath, what type of things do you use when you take a bath? Most people use a washcloth, a loofah sponge, something. Soap of some sort, gel of some sort, usually shampoo of some sort. When you shave, you have a razor, you have shaving cream. With your cleaning and trimming of fingernails and toenails, we usually have clippers or some sort of manicure instruments. With mouth and teeth, we have toothbrush, toothpaste, dental floss, maybe denture creams of this nature, things like that. Washing, grooming, cutting of hair, we've got shampoos, We have scissors, we have somebody to cut your hair. Well, if the facility definition here is requiring that the facility has to provide these services, you need to provide these types of things so that these services can be provided for. So you can't tell the personal care home resident who comes in, yes, we'll assist you with everything if you provide us with all the stuff. Well, they didn't give us shampoo, so that's why their hair hasn't been washed in a year. That's not reasonable. That's not acceptable. Now, if I go in and say, well, I only use, and you can tell I'm going to be silly here, but I'm trying to think of a high-end hair product. What? Joy Cut?
Joy Cut.
Okay, Joyco. Okay, that's a high-end hair product. Well, that's all I use. I won't use Swab. Well, that's another story. That's not reasonable. We don't expect you to go out and buy a $40 bottle of shampoo. You can supply, we use, I don't know, I use Pantene, and it doesn't seem too expensive, but maybe whatever, a routine hair product that washes and cleans the hair, and that's acceptable to everybody. Now, if they don't want to use that and they want something else, or they want to go to the beauty shop, or I only go here and get a $125 haircut, well, that's fine. That's wonderful. We encourage you to do that. That's your lifestyle. Keep as much of your regular life as possible, but that's going to be an additional cost, and that's reasonable. Nobody would expect that to be unreasonable. The same thing. We provide whatever this brand of shaving cream is and this razor. This is what we've got. Well, that's not what I use. I want this. Well, that's great. You can get that. But if it's an additional cost, or you can have a family breakdown. Now, they don't have to use any of your products. They may, like I'm not using that towel. I only use X thread count Egyptian cotton. Well, that's fine too. And they can bring those in, or they can purchase those, or whatever. But you have basic necessities to provide personal services at your facility. Now, with that also, every towel in my house, is it pristine and looks like the towels in the guest bath? No. But those are the good towels. That's the company. The stuff I use is the little frayed, the stuff I use, I'd probably cite you in your facility on. So don't use what I use. Make sure stuff is in good condition. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the best. But it needs to be, I always think that if this was going to be on television and the news camera was going to hold up the towel that you use for your residents, would you be happy to stand there and say, yes, this is what we provide? If not, then you need to do something about it. But if you're okay with it and it looks fine and it's still usable, that's fine. Okay. Just once again, I always try to say, let's look at this from a reasonable point of view, what a reasonable individual would think. So basically, have I got my kind of point across here? That because there's been some misunderstandings, I think, with personal care homes. I've been to personal care homes in the past where they have felt that we provide the service, they provide the stuff, the utensils or the products for us to do the services. That's not what the regulations mean. They mean these services have to be provided, and if there's a particular thing, like for example, yes, we'll cut hair, but they don't give us scissors to do it. You see how that doesn't make really a lot of sense. Now, the other thing is, too, it doesn't talk about a good haircut here. So let's be reasonable with that also. You don't want to come in and everybody has a bowl cut who looks like, Dr. Spock. So, but at the same time, there's no expectation for you to go to the nicest salon in your neighborhood and have everybody get a $100 haircut either. So, reasonable expectations. But you also don't want to walk in and everybody has a beard and hair down to their knees. Like, yeah, please.
Something else.
You're loud enough.
Okay. Something else that you need to consider is in taking care of hair. If you have African Americans in your facility or anybody who has some other form of hair type other than Caucasian, straight, your people who are taking care of their hair, they need to know how to take care of it. I've been in situations where people have not known how to care for someone's hair, and they end up stripping their hair, ruining their hair, or they end up having bald spots. That's not acceptable. So whoever you're caring for, you do need to make sure that you know how to care for their basic needs as it relates to their hair type or what have you. So if you do have African Americans in your home, you need to be aware and cognizant, and your staff need to be aware and trained on how to provide care for those individuals.
And I think, once again, it's very important during an initial assessment, because it's what I think Samantha's point is well taken. But also, everybody has different belief systems, sometimes have different religious belief systems, and sometimes that bleeds over into their hygiene and their personal care. And then, of course, there's also some people who didn't practice good hygiene before they came to your facility. And I doubt that just because they walk through the front door, now all of a sudden, I'm going to start practicing good hygiene. There are facilities that take a particular type of client or resident into the facility that may have been living on the street previous. So actually what they're experiencing in this facility is brand new to them. The idea of taking a shower once a week is very foreign. So those are things that sometimes some education comes in. There may be some resistance to that also. So it's not an easy job, and I understand that. But what we would want to see from the Office of Inspector General, which we are an enforcement agency to make sure the regs are met, is what are you doing about it? And an answer of, oh, they refuse, is really not enough. That's too easy. And I think everybody understands it's too easy. To tell me that, you know, this is what we've done, we've met, we've talked to them, we've talked to family, we met with them, we explained why it's important to have good hygiene, we encourage them. Maybe there's a particular activity they like to do. So what we do is we kind of realize that on Fridays they really are excited about this. So on Thursday we go in and say, well, we need to make sure we get our showers so that Friday when we're going to this activity, we look our best. I know you're really excited about this. Or maybe even on Friday before that, to kind of marry the two together so that it becomes a positive experience. Now, I'm playing kind of a little armchair psychologist here, and I know that, but it's a simplified example. But what I want you to do is just think outside the box. To just simply say they refuse to take a shower, therefore they sit over there, they're dirty, they stink, they're miserable, it's too easy, it's too simple. Now, if it does get to that point and somebody just absolutely, no matter what you do, absolutely refuses, then you have to ask yourself, can we meet their needs? Are they appropriate if they are refusing every single thing that we're trying to do, or the majority of what we're trying to do? Then you kind of have to ask yourself. Then you also may want to start looking at, is there some self-neglect here with this individual? Do we need to have someone else involved in looking at this? So nothing is, very few things are just black and white. So. Okay, moving on past that. This is qualified dietitian or nutrition, and I think once again, these are pretty explanatory exactly what the definition is here. So I'm going to pass that. But any of these that I move past, if you have questions, stop me because we can discuss this. Residential care. Pretty much, you're going to be providing interpersonal care home, room accommodations, housekeeping, maintenance, dietary services, laundry of residents, clothing, bed linens. And I think that's kind of self-explanatory here. But basically, it gets into some things. Once again, the resident says, don't come into my room. I don't want you cleaning my room. Think of this from a regulatory agency. We can't go in and excuse that this floor is filthy, that the toilet's covered in feces, that the shower has mold growing in. Well, the resident won't let us clean their room. Think about how that sounds. It really doesn't work. And once again, put yourself in front of your favorite newscaster and them showing you pictures of this with everybody watching. Are you going to feel comfortable saying, well, they won't let us clean their room? There's got to be a little more to it. You've got to step up and say, okay, what can we do here? And if they absolutely refuse, can we meet their needs? Those are questions you have to ask. And those are things you can explain to the resident, not as a threat. Well, we're going to kick you to the curb if you don't let us clean your shower. I don't mean that. But you can explain to the resident, you know, we are charged with meeting your needs. We have to do this. There's a regulation here. I've even had administrative staff actually show the resident, the regular. You know what's going to happen if the state comes in here? And then also, not as a threat, but also to let them know. You're kind of setting yourself up for someone else to come in with neglect issues here to start making decisions for you. And I know you don't want that. You're a very independent person. You just told me to get out of your room. You don't want me in here. I know how independent you are. But if you don't at least let us do this, maybe the problem is you don't want us in here while you're reading. How about we find some place for you to go that's quiet? Or maybe what we'll do is we'll skip your room, cleaning it now, and while you're at lunch, we can do this. Now, I know we're making a lot of accommodations, but sometimes you have to do that for individuals. Maybe it's only one person you have to do that for. But try to find ways, work with the resident to get things done. And most people do. I think these are things you do every single day, you just don't even think about it. You come up with, you have to be creative when you have a population. Because if I had to meet every single person's needs in here just for lunch, it'd probably drive me crazy. Because everybody is an individual. They have individual likes and dislikes. So one of the things, I love liver and onions. And I love Brussels sprouts. So if I said, well, today everybody's going to get liver and onion and Brussels sprouts, I bet you not a whole lot of people would be happy with that. But then on the other side, if I said, we're going to have Big Mac, French fries, and a milkshake, there's probably a lot of people in here that would be horrified over that. So everybody is different. So we've got to look at individual needs. Restraints. I think this is pretty important that we need to be aware of this. Where I find restraints get used a lot, and besides looking at the field stuff, are staff that don't understand what a restraint is. So the definition of restraint is very important. A pharmaceutical agent, so drugs, medication, something, or physical or mechanical device used to restrict the movement of a patient or movement of a portion of the patient's body. Okay? Just about 2 weeks ago, we got a call. Personal care home. There was a sitter in the personal care home who the family had hired, and they wanted a sitter with their loved one 24 hours a day. They had 3 people coming in every day, in addition to paying for personal care services. The lady keeps getting up. She stumbles and falls very easily. She's ambulatory, and she can walk, but she'll get up in the middle of the night. She can't see what's going around, and she'll decide to walk, and she'll stumble and fall. That's why they want the sitter there. She doesn't fall usually during the day, but at night she will, and she won't turn on a light. They tried to explain to her the importance of talking to the sitter, turning on the light, something. She's not going to do it, just over and over. So the sitter decides, well, you know what? To keep her from hurting herself, so I don't lose my job, she doesn't get hurt, I'm just going to take this sheet and just wrap it around her on the chair, but I do it loosely, and that way, when she starts trying to get loose, I recognize it, and I say, well, where do you want to go? Well, in his mind, he thought that was a great idea. That's a restraint. He tied her to a chair, loose or not. She couldn't get out of it. It's a restraint. Now, there were some issues. First of all, was she appropriate for personal care? We had some other issues here also. But that is a restraint. We've also had complaints, or we found during investigations, where the nurse was like, oh my gosh, she is driving me crazy. Or the staff who has access to medications, you know what? I'm going to give her one of those PRN Benadryls. She'll go to sleep, we'll be fine. We're short-staffed or whatever. That's not what PRN Benadryl's for. It's not for the staff's convenience. It's not because, Miss Sandy back here is driving me crazy tonight. No, that's not what that's for. The doctor did not write that and say this PRN Benadryl is in case this resident gets on your nerves. And I hope we never have a doctor's report like that. But do you see what I'm saying? We have to be careful. That's a restraint. She didn't come up and say, I'm driving you crazy, I'd like you to give me something so I don't drive you crazy anymore. That wasn't what happened. So be very careful about what happens with restraints. Most people, I think, in this room right now would be very aware of what a restraint is and would be horrified at those situations, but you have to make sure that your staff is aware of that and that they understand it. Because even if they have good intentions, lots of times people are restrained with the best of intentions. I have family members call me all the time saying, my mom fell at the facility. I have tried and tried and tried to get them to put bed rails on her bed. I have tried to get them to put seat belts on her wheelchair. I have tried to get them to keep her from standing up. Well, the daughter, the son, whoever, they don't want mom to fall, break a hip, get an injury. I understand that. their thoughts are based on keeping her safe. But what they're not understanding is those restraints have their own outcome. She stops having the ability to walk because she no longer can get up and move about. She starts becoming incontinent. I mean, there's all kinds of things, pressure areas. She starts losing just muscle tone and the ability to move about. So restraints have their own problems. And in a personal care home, just restraints, you need to really think twice anytime there's a restraint. Now, I'm not telling you that it's impossible to have one, but just it's not something, if I see a restraint, there's going to be red flags everywhere for me. I'm going to be like, this is a personal care home. Why is there a restraint going on? Trying to think of reasons. I think there was a resident that was brought back to a personal care home. She was having a reaction to a medication, and the doctor had a restraint for her, but I think it was time limited to within 24 hours. And they were worried about her harming herself. She was actually gouging into her skin. And they put some sort of restraint glove on her so she could not scratch her skin. But it was time limited. In fact, she ended up, the facility felt very uncomfortable with it, and she went to the emergency room and was admitted to the hospital. And then once that was taken care of, she came back to the personal care home. But restraints just shouldn't be something you see routinely in a personal care home. Do you have anything on that? Any questions with that? Licensee. If you're the licensee of this personal care home, the buck stops with you. Just want to make sure everybody understands that. So if there's something pretty serious that's going on in that facility, and we determine the facility is negligent or the facility is culpable for that, you're probably going to have the licensee tag written, because the licensee is responsible for oversight of that facility. So basically, then that's what this is telling you, is that the licensee is responsible. The licensee has to be in compliance with federal, state laws, local laws, any regulations, and then has to establish policies relating to those laws and regulations. And here's one of the things. This has always struck me as being very unfair. I live in Louisville. Don't travel a whole lot by car because I don't like to drive. So let's say I'm on a trip in Tennessee and I'm driving through Tennessee and I get pulled over by the local sheriff who tells me, you can't do that here when you're driving down a road and writes me a ticket. I'm like, well, I didn't know that. That's not the way it is in Jefferson County in Kentucky. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You'll hear that in any court in the land. It's the same way with you. For a licensee or an operator to say, well, I didn't know that law existed. I didn't know that regulation existed. It's not going to keep you from getting a deficiency. Maybe you can look at it as a learning experience and move forward. But just to let you know that the expectations are that if you operate in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, that you're going to meet all the laws, regulations, and federal laws that may govern. Okay? And I don't think it's really that unreasonable. Most of the time, this isn't something that's going to jump up and hit you. You're pretty much going to know. Now, some of the regulations are a little ambiguous. If you run across one you're not sure of, call our office, talk to Samantha. You can call, each region has a complaints coordinator and a regional program manager. You can call them. And what I tell people is call me on anything you want to. I probably don't have the answer, but I've got a list of people that are brilliant that will give me the answer, and then I'll come back and give it to you, and I'll tell you I did it. I came up with it. Give me credit. But no, seriously, we'll get an answer to you. Even though sometimes the answer may not be what you want to hear, we'll get you an answer, okay? The administrator just goes on to talk about being responsible for the operation of the facility and delegate responsibility to someone in their absence, okay? So when we go to a personal care home, just make sure there's someone there. And because you're open 24 hours a day, so if I show up on Sunday at 7 in the evening, there has to be somebody in charge of your facility and be able to act in charge of your facility, okay? So if I come in because there's a complaint that on the Sunday evening meal, they serve peanut butter every single Sunday and there's no substitutions and the food is awful, so I have to go on Sunday at the evening meal, because for me to show up on Monday morning and ask you about Sunday, it didn't make any sense. I need to do some observations. I need to see so that when I write my complaint narrative up, I can explain, well, this is what I saw. When I interviewed the residents, there was nothing to this. I don't even know where that came from. Or, wow, this is happening here. I actually get to see the meal service. Well, with that, I need to be able to talk to somebody who can talk to me about the facility's meal plans, can talk to me about why this is occurring, who can talk to me about the regulations. If I've got somebody who's like, well, I don't know, this is just what they do, I don't know. Miss Jane's not here, Mr. John's not here, I don't know, I can't answer the question. Who's in charge of your facility? Now, I also don't expect that person to be the administrator or to be the licensee. So there may be issues they're not aware of, but if they can, just like me, if they can get hold of that information, that's what's important. Okay? So I'm not expecting you to have a person who's an administrator at that facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who can operate as though they were the administrator. But they have to have basic knowledge and can take on responsibility in the absence of the administrator.